Hey, so today I wanted to talk about the deploy and redeploy commands. There's there's some confusion around them. I get questions once in a while about when should I use the redeploy command? What does it do? Should I just use deploy here? So I'm going to walk you through both commands, and I'm going to explain a bit what they're doing and when you want to use the redeploy command. So just as an example, I brought up this WooCommerce test project that I have. We're gonna start the deployment, and I'm gonna just talk a bit through it as it's happening. So what the deploy command does is that it'll validate your project. So if there's any problems with your project configuration, you'll get alerted. Then it's gonna build that project, and here we have like a container image deployment. So it's gonna use Docker to build your container image, tag it. It's now shipping it to your AWS infrastructure. And then once that's done, we're going to start the whole deployment process. So the big thing to understand with this is that there are two phases to the deployment. There's a local phase that's done on your machine, which we call the build phase. And then there's the actual deployment. Which happens, actually there's three parts. Well, now that I'm seeing it, there's also the parts where your assets get uploaded or like copied over. So, but once that's done, there's just the deployment. So the big difference between a deploy and a redeploy is that when you do a redeploy, I assume that everything that's done on your machine, so that is the build and the asset processing, hasn't changed. So you haven't installed a new plugin, you haven't made any code changes, there's nothing specific to the project that needs to be updated or sent over to your infrastructure. Instead, what redeploy is useful for is if you've made changes to your environment. So things like common examples are secrets and environment variables. If you've made changes to them, those aren't changes that require a code change. They're just, like yesterday I did a video on database users, how to create them, but specifically, if you change the password, there's a warning that says you need to deploy or redeploy your project. And usually, in most cases, you just want to redeploy because what ended up happening is your password changed and you just need that environment variable to get updated. And redeploy is the fastest way to get that done because it'll go through a fraction of the build processes, and then it'll sorry, I'm blanking right now. It'll go through a fraction of the build processes and just update the environment variables, and then you're done. So it's a lot faster than what we're doing right now, which is just the deployment. So I'm going to do a small example. I actually had to restart this video because I showed sensitive information earlier. But the main idea here, and what we're going to do is I'm going to do Ymir PHP info. And when you do Ymir PHP info, you get all the environment variables back. So I'm not going to do that because I showed like the database password by mistake. So what we're going to do is we're going to grep, and then I'm just going to say Ymir test, for example. And if we do that, we'll see that we should get nothing back because there's no environment variable that's called Ymir test. But if I just do Ymir environment variables, I believe it's plural, change. Yes, okay. And then we do Ymir test, and we just say hello. All right, so now you get the warning. It says you want to deploy or redeploy. Here, we just need to redeploy. So, because we just added this environment variable, but there's no code change. We're not actually using it. We just need it to be reflected in our environment. So if I just do Ymir redeploy now, it'll just do a redeployment. So we know the code's the same. We know that the assets are the same, so we're not making changes to that. All that we're saying is just go back through like the entire deployment steps that are important for to just update the infrastructure based on changes we might have done, and run through that. And that takes a lot less time because like there's no build phase. So the build, especially like I'm on an M1, so it went pretty quickly. But if you have an older computer, the build can be quite long. Uploading the assets, if you have a big project, can be quite long. Some projects that I've seen have like 20,000 assets or more. That takes a while. So because you're redeploying, you don't have to do all of that. So that's a lot faster. The updating function step is obviously going to take a bit long. It's going to take the same amount of time, and that's usually the most time consuming step of like on Ymir. What's happening on Ymir, because there's so much going on to just like update your Lambda function. That's what updates your Lambda function. So there's just a lot going on, and it takes a while for AWS to also update. So that takes a while, but here we go. We're almost done. And what you'll see now is that when we're going to do that PHP info command now, you'll see the environment variable. And that's probably the most common use case that you're going to use the redeploy command for. So it's for environment variables, which we did here, which is like a simpler thing, but but there's also secrets. So if you change a secret, then like you change an API key or something like that, then you can just do a redeploy and it'll be really quick. So if we do that and I'm correct, there we go. So you see it 3 times because it's at 3 locations, but it's there. And that's really the essence of what the deploy versus redeploy is. What you use a redeploy when you just made a small environment change that doesn't involve your configuration file, because as you saw, we didn't validate your configuration file. Like we're using the same configuration that you had for that deployment. If you need to make a configuration file change in your ymir.yml file, that is a deploy because it needs to get validated and everything, and that validation steps happens there. So it's really about things that you've changed in your infrastructure on the AWS side, and you just want that change to reflect on your project, then you use the redeploy. So I hope that was helpful, and that answers your questions about the deploy and redeploy commands.